Hello, everybody. Today, my Bible reading was about Elisha. Now, Elisha is a very interesting character in the Old Testament, and as most prophets are, they're very interesting. They don't follow the rules, they don't listen to the kings, and they speak God's word no matter what the consequences are. So, well, at least the cult prophets do. There's two groups of prophets in the Old Testament, and you'll hear some of the cult prophets refer to this other group as false prophets a lot of the time, but not always. Uh, you have the cult prophets, and then you have the court prophets. Now, the cult prophets were the ones that kind of lived by their own rules. They listened to the word of God, interpreted it the way they thought was right, and then the court prophets were beholden to a king. And if you know anything about being under someone with a lot of power, it can be very, very tempting to say things just to make that person happy. And you may be already experiencing that in your life, where you've got some friends that you feel peer pressure to say the right things around them, or to get them to like you, or when you get older, maybe a boss that you will maybe do things that you aren't right, or a little dishonest, or maybe you're just not being yourself because you want your boss to like you, or maybe a significant other, a girl or a guy. There's a lot of times that we act a certain way that might not be honest to try to impress somebody else. And that was a lot of times what the court prophets would do. And when they did that, they were called false prophets. And a lot of the times it was the cult prophets who were calling these sellouts false prophets. Now, Elisha was one of these cult prophets. He didn't live in a city under the pay or in the court of a king, but he did still have interactions with the king of Israel. This was the northern kingdom after the civil war of Israel. And the story of Elijah was the successor of Elijah, and Elisha was now the leader of this group of cult prophets, and their prophetic group was called the Sons of the Prophet. Elijah had been the leader, and then he had passed that mantle down to Elisha. All right, a lot of similar names, a lot of Old Testament stuff, but there's this kingdom. They were called the Arameans, and they had been going to war with Samaria, which was the northern kingdom of Israel. And as they had set this raiding party up, but Elisha knew where the raiding party was. It doesn't say how he knew. It could have been divine revelation. It could have been he was so in touch with the people in the area that he just had a good intelligence network, and he was told things. Either way, Elisha always knew where these guys were. And time again, he would go to the king of Israel and he would say, "Hey, don't go that way. They're waiting in ambush. They want to kill you." So the king listened to him over and over again. He was obedient to Elisha, listened to his wisdom. So the king of the Arameans was really mad. He was like, which of us in this room is against me? Because he knew somebody had to be giving him this information. Someone had to be spying on them to let the other king, the king of Israel, know where the troop movements were at. And all the guys said, "No, none of us are spies. It's just the prophet. The prophet of their God he knows the very things you say in your bedroom, king." And he said, "Well, where does this prophet lay?" And he said, "He lives in this city." And the king took an army and he went to that city. And the king didn't go himself, but he sent an army to that city to capture or to kill Elisha. Now, Elisha is in the city, but when this whole army gets there to arrest Elisha, his servant is like freaking out, as you would be. I would be freaking out a little bit. An entire army came to pick me up. But his servant was freaking out, and he said, "Lord, what are we going to do?" And he said, "Don't worry. those who are with us are greater than those who are with them. And at that time, the eyes of the other army opened up and they could see hundreds of fiery chariots and soldiers. And then Elisha prayed to God and he said, make them blind. So the whole army went blind, and then Elisha led them to the king of Israel. And the king of Israel now had this army of the enemy and at his mercy. And Elisha gave them their sight back. But now they're surrounded by the king of Israel. And the king of Israel said, Master, I think he called him Master. He referred to Elisha with a term of respect and endearment and thanks and gratitude. And he said, let me make sure I get this right. He said, after entering the city, Lord, open the eyes of these men so that they can see. Then the Lord opened their eyes, and they looked, and they saw they were inside Samaria. When the king of Israel saw them, he asked Elijah, shall I kill them, my father? So he said, my father. So that's a term of respect. And when a lot of times when you're dealing with these kings of Israel, they're not being very respectful to these cult prophets. But obviously, this king had a lot of respect for Elisha. And he listened to the words of Elisha because he knew Elisha spoke the truth that God gave him. And instead of taking wrath on the soldiers that Elisha had captured and given to the king, Elisha said, no, feed them, give them water, and let them return to their king. And he showed mercy on them. And that stopped the raids into Israel from the Arameans for a time. Now, we always have that struggle of how does the Old Testament connect to today? And I want to focus on that one phrase that Elisha said. He said, those who are with us are greater than those who are with them. And we can apply that because if you think about the odds that are against us, sometimes we feel like the world's against us, our culture's against us, and it feels like the whole world's rotten or is against Christianity, and that we feel alone or isolated. But that's not the case. We have a huge support system, not only with the church and with your family and with the Christians, but also, we can't forget that, the side that God is on vastly outnumbers the side that opposes him. That can mean different things to different people, but it gives me a great feeling of comfort to know that that God is on my side. And this kind of contrasts with a story of Elisha's predecessor. Now, Elijah had a situation pretty similar like this, where this king was chasing him, and instead of standing at the ground and trusting in God, Elijah ran. And then he ran to this desert where he was starving, and God saved him. He gave him food and water, and then he listened, and he finally heard God's voice, and God revealed himself to him in that still small voice. But Elijah had this mentality that he was one of the only people out there for God. And it was this Elijah complex. Woe is me, I'm all alone. No one's here to help me. I'm the last holy prophet of the Lord in all of Israel. And it was during that time that God revealed to Elijah that no, he was not alone, that there were hundreds and thousands of other followers in hiding, just like he was, in the land, trying not to get persecuted by the evil king. And Elisha knew this lesson already. He didn't have to get taught that. Or maybe he learned from his master's mistakes or from the wisdom of those who came before him, because when the king came to take Elisha, he didn't run, because he knew that God was there, that he knew that the side that God was on was the winning side, no matter what happened to him. And you see that attitude repeated over and over in the Bible. And that's not to say bad things don't happen to people who are on the Lord's side, because they do. But we have to remember that no matter if we're on this side of, if we're on this world or the next world, we're all on the winning side. We've won already. Just as Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael said, they said, talking to Nebuchadnezzar, no matter if you blow all those trumpets again, King Nebuchadnezzar, we will not bow down to this golden image you've set before us. And he's like, and our God, because we know our God will save us. Then they said, but even if he doesn't, we will not bow down to this false idol. And that's the mentality that we should have. We should believe and we should hope that God will take us from the furnace. But if we go into the furnace, we have to understand that God's there with us. And sometimes through our suffering, God takes that attitude that we have when we persevere. When we persevere through all the trials and tribulations in our life, and our light still shines even when there's darkness all around us, that's when we're shining the greatest. So if you feel like you've been suffering a lot lately, you might have been. But know that when there's the more darkness there is, the more it contrasts with the light. So if your light's shining just as bright now as when you're doing good in life, it's allowing God to shine greater through you. Oh, that was an interesting little read from the Old Testament. The prophets are very interesting. They've got all kinds of cool stories about what happened during their time, and it's amazing to read. So definitely recommend some of those Old Testament prophets, especially during this age of Elijah and Elisha. Many great and mighty things were done in God's name. And so go read it. 2 Kings and 1 Kings. There's some really, really good stuff to read in there. But as far as prayer requests, guys, keep the nation in our prayers. We've got some stuff brewing with Iran, and politics aside, we have to pray for our president as he tries to make some decisions, tough decisions, and navigate these tough waters. And because I don't think anybody wants a war, and Iran doesn't want a war, America doesn't want a war, and we don't want our brothers and sisters going over there and dying. And we just have to pray for wisdom and guidance. And I think it's going well so far, but just keep the government in your prayers and our soldiers in your prayers, and hopefully everything will work out. Keep those who've lost loved ones recently in your prayers. They're still in that mourning and grieving process, and just know that there's light at the end of the tunnel, and one day you'll be able to remember them a little clearly as who they were, instead of kind of how they've wasted away in these last months before they went. But praying for everybody. Love you all. Have a nice day.